Hi there everyone, welcome to this week's video. For this video we're going to be discussing Plato's Republic, books 6 and 7. For this week we're actually going to have two videos discussing these really vital passages from the Republic. This is because these are some of the most dense and rich and important passages really in Plato's entire philosophy. I had us read the Republic's books 1 and 2 last week to get a sense of how the Republic is in some way kind of a Socratic dialogue, or at least it entails certain elements of a Socratic dialogue in its early form. But now we are looking at how it is that Plato's argument develops into the middle section of the book. I apologize for the fact that, you are having to kind of jump around from the earliest part of the book to somewhere, pretty decently far into the middle. That's a little bit challenging, but at the same time, I think that, the alternative would be that you would have to read, like 150 pages a week for like a few weeks. And I don't really think that, Plato is really an author that can be read that quickly like that. Or at least I know that I can't do that, right? So instead, we're going to have to settle for the tidbits that we do get together in this class. But the good thing is that we can get some really seminal, vital passages from the Republic and be able to discuss them together today. I'm also going to be referencing the seventh letter, which is also reading for this week. It has its own really interesting ideas and reception history, so we'll be sure to, discuss that throughout as well. The central thesis of the Republic that people found really shocking, have continued to find really shocking, is Plato's thesis that philosophers should rule the city. The philosophers should be the nucleus of political power because only they know what is just. Right? This is Plato's view. And remember, it's important to contextualize this view in terms of what happened to his own philosophical mentor, Socrates, right? Let's get his analysis of sophism in there too before we do that. Sophists are the product and producer of presently existing unjust societies, right? And, for Plato, the trial of Socrates would be absolutely case in point, right? Because in that situation, right, the philosophical soul, Socrates, who is in fact the, central sort of narrator for, what we're reading in the Republic, Socrates is put to death, right? And he is put to death, in fact, by sophists, right? By the political order of Athens himself. He, the philosopher, fell, to injustice, to these mere rhetoricians, right? Who wanted to, get rid of him, right? And so Plato clearly internalized that. It's a central part of why Socrates plays such a central role in the Republic, but also in Platonic texts in general, is because he sees Socrates as sort of like the preeminent philosopher who is born into a sophistic society, right? A society that is oriented around appearances and untruth, right? He tried to live a life of truth and was in fact punished for it, right? So it's precisely because the sophists were able to play with appearances, right? They made Socrates appear to be impious. They made Socrates appear to corrupt the youth. They made Socrates appear to be guilty, right? Even though, I think Plato would implore us to all think, we all really know that he's not guilty, right? And so, one way of diagnosing what went wrong in the trial and death of Socrates is that the sophists won, that appearances triumphed over reality, and someone who lived his life in the name of truth had to die to those who would rather live in the vain appearance of truth, right? And so the Republic, Plato's imagined just society, is precisely one where this doesn't happen anymore, where people are able to cultivate a genuine philosophical nature um, without, in a way, being corrupted by the society in which they live, right? I mean, just think about our own situation. I've tried to insist in the last, video, as well as this video, that the problems that Plato discusses are still with us, right? And along those lines, right, you might get a lot more money and attention and go viral or whatever if you say something that's like really stupid and offensive, right? You're just manipulating how people feel, and that's enough to get attention, your ad revenue, political capital, and so on, right? I mean, we could just think about how, like, so much of social media, the intention is to enrage you, right? Because precisely that kind of engagement is more likely to be like protracted and ongoing than it is, for you to learn something good or happy or whatever, right? And so we too live in a society that is more interested in appearances, that rewards the manipulation of appearances with money and political power, and where it seems really hard to live a life where you want to live justly and you want to live in your truth and you're not willing to bend to the whims of various other people, right? And so we can read Plato talk about this a little bit. I have this long quote here that's 497b. Here, Plato through Socrates says, none of our present constitutions is worthy of a philosophical nature, right? And so, in a way, that's to say that there was nowhere that Socrates could go, right? Athens was, in a way, the most sophisticated or like accepting of all of the Greek city-states, and Socrates even perished in Athens, right? So what does that say about the possibility for philosophy really anywhere on Plato's account? So none of our present constitutions are worthy of a philosophical nature, and as a result, this nature is perverted and altered. For just as foreign seed sown in an alien ground is likely to be overcome by native species and fade away among them, so the philosophical nature fails to develop its full power and declines into a different kind of character, right? So you might think about this, in relationship to Socrates, right? If Socrates was able to live out the rest of his life, I mean, he was, quite old at this point, but who knows when he would have passed otherwise, right? Then he would have been able to develop the full power of philosophy and continue to teach his various students, Plato probably among them, right? And, while Socrates is a shining example of an uncorruptible soul, right, many of us, even those of us who would like to pursue a philosophical life, right, we don't have uncorruptible souls. So, in that case, right, you might have to live as a sophist or something like that in order to make enough money to sustain your family. And you might think about like the pressures that academia puts on philosophers here too, as a way that their nature is perverted and altered, right? Uh, if the institution was really concerned with producing truth, with producing the best insight possible, right, then you would be encouraged to publish if and only if you believe that you have discovered something that is true, that you can feel is justified and is a, kind of novel insight. But that's not how academia works, right? If you want a job, if you want to be hired, if you want, to be recognized by other people, get certain kinds of opportunities, then you got to push out as much stuff as possible, right? In academia, this is called publish or perish, right? The idea is you have to be extremely productive in your academic work to acquire other people's recognition that you're worthy, and it's that recognition that you're worthy that signals to universities and other academic institutions like, oh, this person is worth paying, this person can be a good teacher, this person's research is worth however much money they're going to give, usually not very much, right? And so you can see in this system how it is that Plato is totally right, that, the philosophical nature is perverted, that, what began as a genuine love of wisdom now has to latch onto, well, it has to be a love of wisdom in a way that impresses these other people, right? In your own relationship to the truth becomes conditioned in a certain respect on the recognition of other people, right? And this is how your own relationship to your own soul, your ability to cultivate a philosophical disposition, is ruined, in effect, by the kinds of societies in which we live, where we are constantly enticed, you might say, away from the truth, right, and towards the mere appearance of the truth, other people's opinions of us, right? Material goods, riches, and so on. Signs in some way that you are good, right? Those are what the sophist is concerned with, right? And what the sophist promises to the people that they claim to be educating. So obviously, something that's really essential here is a kind of philosophy of education, right? How is it that you can cultivate your soul to become a philosophical nature like a Socrates, right? And what are the social and political conditions on your ability to do that? And this is where Plato develops one of the most really iconic, aspects of his own philosophy, and that's the allegory of the cave. And this is meant to be a way of thinking about our own society as well as a way of thinking about what a kind of philosophical education is, right? So this is the little doodle that I have here, right? So this is the surface. I don't know why there's like a weird hill or whatever. I don't know what's going on. But in any case, you can see the important part is they're underground, right? You have these people that I drew in the black marker, they're chained up and so on, right? And according to Plato's account, they're forced to look at projections of shadows on the screen, right? So they have no light of their own. They're forced to follow the appearances that are produced by light and also, someone that would manipulate the light, right? I imagine you could do like a little projector, or, more likely to be what Plato is thinking about, a little fire, and someone is, doing various, you know, manipulating the shadows, right? Making shadow puppet animals, right? And this is what everyone is chained up and has to watch, right? Plato says, and he intends this to be shocking, this society where you're chained up underground and forced to watch mere shadows, right? The manipulation of shadows. This society, Plato says, is like our own, right? So in the same way that these people exist in a kind of state of political unfreedom, right, and they're forced to rely on mere appearances, right, that are produced by someone else. In this case, I drew the sophist in this blue marker, and he's not all chained up, right? He's the one manipulating the shadows and so on, right? This is like what Athens was like, right? You have people that are shackled in a way to common opinion, to dogma, and you have people that are, skilled and interested manipulators of this dogma, right? Who are interested not in the truth of things, but in producing certain kinds of appearances. And the people, of course, having only lived here in the cave, are enamored with these appearances. So Plato next imagines that what the philosophical soul would need to accomplish in order to be what it is the philosopher has to turn away, right? In a way, what's the problem is a certain kind of orientation, right? The ordinary people in the black marker, they're oriented towards the mere manipulation of appearances, right? And they're oriented that way because they're shackled up, right? Because I have to worry about what other people think about me, I'm very concerned with it, right? But what the philosopher does, and hence I drew this philosopher in sort of the color, that we've been describing philosophy in, this rich purple color, right? What the philosopher does is the philosopher turns away. They disorient themselves from this commonsensical orientation towards mere appearances and seek the origin of those appearances, right? And so initially, probably the philosopher encounters the fire, right, and the manipulator, but the philosopher thinks, well, there has to be an even deeper truth than that. A source of light that's more primordial than the thing that this sophist guy manipulates, right? And so what happens to the philosopher is they eventually find their way out of the cave, right? And then when they reach the surface, they're able to see not just appearances in the shadow, but they're able to see things the way that they really are, right? They deal not just with a manipulated source of light, but the source of all light, right? The sun. Plato calls this, figure in his allegory the form of the good, right? And this is like what the philosopher is oriented toward, right? They're oriented not towards images projected on a screen, right? Not even to the source of light that's manipulated to produce those images, but the source the source of all intelligibility whatsoever, right? The form of the good. Why does Plato say the form of the good is the source of all intelligibility? Well, because to say that something is courageous, to say that something is virtuous, to say that something is just, is to say that it's good, right? And so the form of the good is in the way the foundation of the forms even of the beautiful or the just or anything like that, right? It's like the ultimate form. It's the form. Is like a German prefix meaning like original, right? Like this is the source of all light and all intelligibility. And that's what the philosopher is interested in, right? Not just shadows on a screen, but what produces all light and all intelligibility whatsoever, right? And so Plato says here, and I quote, education isn't what some people declare it to be, namely, putting knowledge into souls that lack it, like putting sight into blind eyes. Just to begin with, think about how this resonates with the society in which we live now, right? The way that we approach education, especially, public education, high school, middle school, elementary school, etc., we conceive of education exactly as putting knowledge into souls that lack it, right? The, child doesn't know the periodic table. Well, the education is about them memorizing the periodic table, right? They need to learn all of the dates for these historical events, right? You need to learn all of this kind of stuff to be declared an educated person in the society in which we live, right? And the fact that we think of education this way is reflected in our practices, namely in standardized exams, right? Standardized exams are built exactly to test whether students have knowledge that have been, in a way, we wouldn't say put into their souls, but we would say, sufficiently memorized or whatever, right? And hence, we have the phenomena of teaching to the test, right? The test determines what knowledge you're evaluated by, and so that's what teachers are, and teachers in schools are evaluated by, and so that's what they aim at, right? But I think we can see that this is a sham education, right? This is a completely messed up, sophistical way of thinking about what education is, right? Why is it like a sophist? Well, the sophist claims that they have wisdom, and for a price, you can get some of it, right? They have wisdom. They think of it like property, and they think about what's happening as like a transfer of property, right? And that is exactly the model of just putting the knowledge that you have into a soul that lacks it, right? People call this sometimes the banking model of education, right? Where you're just trying to like cram as much in to students' brains as you possibly can, right? This is not the Platonic view. For Plato, education is the craft concerned with this very thing, namely this turning around, and with how the soul can most easily and effectively be made to do it, right? And what he means is the turning around that takes place from, being chained up and being oriented towards images and so on, to wanting to leave the cave, right? To wanting to see and celebrate the good, right? And Plato also thinks, and this is an essential dimension of his political philosophy, he imagines that the philosopher goes out of the cave, rises up to the surface, witnesses the sun, and knows at that moment that they have to go back and liberate the people, right? The philosopher, in a way, can't be indifferent to political life. The philosopher couldn't just be like, oh, screw those people, right? They suck. I have the good, and, good for me and bad for them, right? Why not? Well, for very similar reasons as we saw in the symposium. If the philosopher recognizes the form of the good, then they know it as good. Namely, not just good for themselves, but good for everyone, right? And that the health of their own soul and the health of their own relationship of the good requires that they not think of it as a private possession in the way that the sophist does, right? And so the philosopher, upon reaching their knowledge of the good, has to go back and try to free everyone from the system of error and deception that they are tied to, right? And one thing that Plato really emphasizes is that this is really hard, right? Like, people are attached to the images. They're taught, these images determine your life. This is everything that you can know. This is, how you will be evaluated, what is important, right? What other people take to be important, what other people take to be a good life, right? And so obviously it's not easy for people to give that up. In the same way that like being flashed with light after you've been in a cave for a very long time is disorienting and confusing, right? Um, but nevertheless, the philosopher has to try, right? The philosopher, because of their knowledge of the good and therefore their commitment to the good, they have to try to see the good political order realized, right? Hence Plato's dedication to the Republic. I want to spend 5 more minutes talking about what I had you read that was a little bit weird. It's the seventh letter by Plato. I want to begin with stating that the authorship of the seventh letter is uncertain, right? While we know for certain that the Republic was written by Plato, we do not know for certain that these letters were written by Plato. You know, there are lots of reasons why. I mean, obviously, there wasn't really a publishing industry in the way that there's a publishing industry now. There's no printing press, there's nothing like that, right? There's also nothing like intellectual property, right? And one thing that people would do to like cultivate their rhetorical skill, right, is they would try to write letters as if they were famous persons. So like write a famous letter as if you were Plato, right? So it's entirely possible that the seventh letter is not actually Plato and may just be one of these writing exercises. That's possible. However, when the text that we have of the seventh letter has been like put through like machine learning stuff, right? So like you can input all of the dialogues that we know to be authentic from Plato into a machine, right? And it can pick up on how Plato talks, how Plato writes, so on and so forth, right? And then say with a pretty high degree of accuracy whether or not this is original Plato, right? And the seventh letter ranks like as extremely Plato, right? In general, those sorts of tests indicate that they think it's Plato. However, people disagree all the time among ancient Greek scholars if they think the seventh letter is real or not, right? That's the main point. There's reasons to debate it on both sides. Nonetheless, I think it is very interesting. It's very interesting in part because it expresses an idea that we get right here in the Republic, right? Namely, that the philosopher's knowledge of the good requires that they really go out and actualize the good, right? And so what the seventh letter details is this trip that Plato allegedly made at some point in his life. I think it was like 364 or something like that, right? To Syracuse to build the Republic, right? As in, like, the Republic is not like a theoretical model or something like that, but he wanted to literally establish the Republic in Syracuse, right? Essentially, the letter describes Plato as his friend Dion. Dion is close to this king, Dionysius, right? And Dion is imploring Plato, oh, well, we might be able to get this guy to listen, right? So why don't we go and try to build the Republic here in Syracuse? And Plato describes the process of being like, yes, because I am a philosopher and I am committed to the good, I'm committed to realizing the good. And so I'm going to go actually build the Republic out in Syracuse. And so the letter basically details his attempts at doing that, his attempts at turning Dionysius' soul away from, mere appearances and towards the truth, right? Okay? It doesn't work. The King Dionysius does not take too well to Plato trying to kind of lead him you know, to be the man behind the man, to be, you know, the ruler, the hotshot, the mastermind behind the whole scheme, right? And so it ends in failure, right? In part of Plato always has two different themes that kind of go together, right? On the one hand, the philosopher hates politics, right? Like the sophist is interested in playing politics, being like, ooh, the most savvy, political, civic, blah 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 blah, right? And the philosopher is not good at that, and never has been, right? Plato constantly has Socrates say things like, "Oh, I can't give speeches," right? And so if this is a speech contest, then I'll lose, right? Fine. But what the philosopher can do is tell the truth, right? And so, as a result, right, most philosophers, if they're philosophers, either go the way of like kind of Heraclitus or like Socrates, right? And what I mean by that is you either like Socrates, you die for your philosophical nature, or you become like Heraclitus and you despise people, right? Heraclitus would be the type of person to climb up, see the form of the good, and like go hang out there by himself for a long time, right? To be like, yeah, these idiots down here, right? They don't know the good. They're not real philosophers, and so on. And you know, Plato in a way understands that attitude, right? Why do you have that attitude? Well, because you don't care about the images, right? You don't care about that stuff. That politics maybe is the domain of manipulating images, right? I did speech and debate as a kid. It's very close to this, right? It doesn't matter if what you're saying is true. It just matters if you win the arguments, right? To learn how to do philosophy, I had to unlearn like a lot of things that taught me about like who is smart and what's worthwhile and what's the best way to approach a book, right? But Plato differs from Heraclitus insofar as Plato thinks that when you turn to the good and you really know that it's good and you know that deeply, then that's when you know you have to go and you have to actualize philosophy. You have to go and you have to save these other people. You can't just be a misanthropic loser or whatever, right? Because if you gave up on them, that would be in a way giving up on the fullest realization of the good possible. And that's unacceptable for Plato. I'm very interested in hearing whether or not you think that the seventh letter is real or not. Did you find it interesting? Do you think it's fake? Do you think it's real? Does it matter? Really, really interested in hearing your all's perspectives. We're also going to have another video on books 6 and 7 just because it's so rich. So I look forward to talking with you all then. Okay, bye.